Charlie! Oh, yes!
It's on its way! It's there! The miracle on grass! McCluggage kicks him into a prelim!
He's got it! Brisbane have won! Bailey's kicked the goal! The dream comes true!
Here it is! The Brisbane Lions have done it! The Hawks, the Bombers, the Crows, they couldn't do it in the 80s and the 90s, but the Lions have gone back to back to back to become the greatest side of the modern era. They are football's invincibles.
The Brisbane Lions Fancast. It is the bye. We are back to have a little bit of a look back at the first 11 weeks of the season, cast our eye forward somewhat, answer a couple of questions that have come through, and just give a bit of a stock take on everything Brisbane Lions at the moment. A bit annoying that Crows loss is still sitting there, and it's our last game to reflect on because it hasn't left my mind. It's sort of been sitting there a little bit, so looking forward to playing the Hawks this Saturday afternoon. But Patrick, thanks again for coming back, because as we know, one day you just might not.
What? How dare you? Yeah, I mean, I think I just tried in this bye week I haven't watched the kick of football, so haven't watched the kick of football, haven't watched a bald head of an analysis. It's all been pretty football free to kind of recharge my batteries for the second half of the season, so I don't know anything.
Fair enough. I mean, there were some decent games over the weekend. GWS and Richmond was a bit of a thriller, as was Essendon and North Melbourne, but there was also some garbage in there as well. And of course, West Coast left with another two people on the bench as well, so they just cannot buy a trick. Even though they stuck it to Collingwood for a while and it looked like the game was on for a bit, it did blow out, as it tends to do at the end.
Actually, that is a slight lie. I didn't see a kick of football, so that is the truth. But I did see the opening bounce of that Collingwood West Coast game whilst I was picking up pizza.
I see.
So I averted my eyes because I was like, "What's the point?" So, yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Bodes well for the back half of the season, just in terms of like head keeping with itness. So. Yeah, what are we doing here? Why did this happen?
Yeah, I guess.
Who am I as an individual? Who are you?
Who am I to speak? Who are you to listen? Peep show reference for those of you that may get that one. A brief look at the first half of the season. 8 wins, 3 losses, which is, obviously a good record in anyone's books. We sit 4th at the ladder currently. The results are a bit skewed with Melbourne having the extra game to this point. We should hopefully balance that out over the next couple of weeks. Losses to Port, to the Dogs, and to the Crows as well. Big wins are coming up against Melbourne, Collingwood, North, GWS, Freo, Carlton, Essendon, the Suns. So a good host of wins there as well. I want to sort of ask you, out of those wins and those losses, what was the best win, or best wins, and the most flattening loss?
I reckon probably I don't think this season we've necessarily been involved in any great games. There's been sort of one close one, and the win over Collingwood was obviously really good, and the win over Melbourne was good, albeit dark. My favourite win was Carlton one by a mile, just because I was there, and it was the first time they kind of played good.
Yep.
That I'd seen in quite a while, particularly down at that venue. That was my favourite. And then probably in a similar sort of sense, but in reverse, the Bulldogs game, massively frustrating to sit there and have to... Oh, yeah. So the best and worst were both of the Marvel games, in my opinion. That's just me. What do you reckon?
Yeah, the Carlton one sticks out for me as well. I guess it was, at the time, an away game against a finals-bound team. It was our most complete... yeah, I know. As you said, it was sort of our most complete performance against a team. Our key defenders played their job. Our forwards played their roles. We shut down Adam Sard. Dunkley had a blinder against Cripps. I think all lines were firing and doing their job. So that sticks out. Obviously, Collingwood, to beat, the top of the ladder team, to be their only loss was good. I'd like to see it later on at Marvel, but we controlled that game from start to finish. It was pretty much 5-6 goals the whole time. So that was really a good one as well. But I can't go past the Port Adelaide loss as the complete low light so far. 6 months of off season. Looking forward to what we're going to bring. Premiership, not favourites, but certainly in the mix with the additions we made in the off season, and then just to not rock up at all and get smoked.
There was a bit to, we've had that a couple of times. I think the Hawthorn game for round 1 in 2020.
Yep.
And then I think the following year was Sydney at the Gabba, where we kicked sort of like 3 goals and everyone was cracking the bloody September champagne. And then Sydney decided that they were going to be a team that year. So it's happened before, I guess. Not necessarily indicative of the season, but yeah, I can see the frustration in that. It's odd. The Collingwood game, their only blemish, but it sort of felt a little bit like, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, because it just was in this like weird void of no one wanting to acknowledge at all that had happened. Because I think at that team it was kind of, even we were saying it, a bit hot and cold, but like, as far as the rhetoric goes around town, it's like Collingwood haven't been beaten because no one talked about it. So
they had the ready-made excuse as well, because I think it was their first game with no recognised ruckman. Like all their key tools were sort of gone. I think it was the first one that McStay was sort of thrown in as a makeshift ruckman, and he didn't last too much longer after that. So they had the ready-made excuse, but I thought we just completely dominated that game, and as you said, it's sort of gone unrewarded in the wider footy community. But yeah, up there for me for sure.
No, I mean, we won a elimination final with McStay as a ruckman, so
yeah, you're not wrong.
What can you say? But yeah, no, I definitely think that it's definitely between the two losses. The one most recent, I suppose, is just kind of like team in hot form, and I still stand by my statement of, if anything had gone differently, we likely would have won that game. So
it's just annoying. It's an annoying loss to have and to sit there for 2 weeks as well.
I know, and I think there's been a lot of stuff just where I think a lot of people are like, it's pretty. That's a game that we sort of lose quite often, and it's like it's frustrating because it's true, but also like it's all about context, and it's one you kind of can afford to, I guess, but not too many, because we've got the magic number of 5 being the number of losses.
So we've got a couple more to spare, and as we have a quick look ahead on it, we won't look too far ahead, but coming back from the bye, Hawthorn at the G, Sydney at the Gabba, Saints at Marvel, and then Richmond and West Coast both at the Gabba, so a couple of weeks in a row at the Gabba. All very winnable games, but, some games there that we shouldn't be taking lightly as well. Saints at Marvel and Richmond and Sydney, in fact, are all games we're going to have to be on top for.
Well, we've got, the back half of the season, 12 games, and there are sort of like 4.5, 5 games that are kind of like, you'd assume we would win all the games at the Gabba, but statistically we don't normally win every game at the Gabba. We normally draw 1. So I don't know, looking at it and you go, okay, so what have we got? We've got Kilda twice. I mean, I'm not sold on St Kilda, but it's just me. Then Melbourne Cats, Pros, Magpies. So it's like there's sort of, and Fremantle at Optus, which is a bit of a danger game. So that's 6 games that could kind of go either way. If you can escape that with only 2 defeats in there, or if you can blitz it like 12 games in a row, that's pretty hot. So this back half of the season arguably could be the most important sort of 3 months of footy that this team, I think, in its iteration has had, because it will really show, like, they can win all of those games, and there have been things to show us throughout the season that they can do it, but there have also been things as to why they won't do it. So for me, if I was looking at this coaching group, looking at the players, the leadership group, the senior players, and going like, this is kind of like, this is big.
I don't know, I kind of, as nice as it would be, a la Geelong last year, to just go through, hit a rich vein of form and just go in undefeated straight through a final series as well. I guess there's sort of merit to dropping one of those games. Call it the Fremantle game at Optus just before finals time to give us another little audit and fine-tune a few things in the lead up to September as well. So, I mean, it would be it would be rich to ask to just go through and win the next, call it 16.
Oh,
to go all the way through.
yeah. I mean, to be honest, I'm not saying that like that's what they need to do, but like, you know, if the team have had over what is it now, 5 seasons or 4.5 seasons, like there's been plenty of audits, there's been plenty of things to show us where there needs to be improvement made. And I think going on a bit of like a confidence run could be just really good for the team, because we've seen what it does to, we've seen how, yeah, particularly our like talls, they kind of tend to operate on confidence. You know, we've talked about the buy-in with a certain degree of like forward group and the pressure and that sort of thing. Like that's the thing that it spirals in a positive way. So, you know, rather than going through, you know, the first half of the season relatively unscathed, I think it's probably, yeah, there's some big games, and I'm looking forward to it. Like, I don't think that it's like now or never. I just think that there's a positive spin that can be done internally within the club to just sort of say like, yeah, this is our thing. We've got to go here.
I don't know. There is something about this year that sort of tells me we need to make the most of it while we can. Potentially next year we're still right in the window, but I don't know. It's another year.
I think we sort of spoke possibly, or it might have been me and just internally talking to myself, like the schizophrenic that I am, sort of wondering whether last year when we played Richmond at the MCG and kind of cooked our goose to death, I sort of wondered whether our current premiership window kind of was door slammed shut. And I think the way they kind of showed in the first couple of rounds and finals, just with a few alterations, you know, mainly with the Dunkley and the Will Ashcroft and just a couple of plugs here and there, like it just kind of showed like it wasn't a rebuild, but it was a bit of a reshuffling, and I think in a pretty sustainable way. So, you know, if it doesn't happen this year, but I mean, that said, like Lachie Neale said when he won the Brownlow in 2020, is like non-negotiable as to playing a grand final next year, and we didn't do that, and then we didn't do that the year after. You know, albeit 2021 was pretty weird given that we lost key forwards every game we played a good, you know, decent team. And then the following year was just, you know, we made the best of a bad situation because we kind of cocked it up during the season. So, yeah, I think this back half of the season is as important as it's been. For me, at least, I don't know.
For sure, and just having a quick look at, you know, those games there, there's definitely some tough ones in there. You know, especially away games against Melbourne and Collingwood and Freo. Those are probably the big ones. And depending on how Gold Coast is going by that stage of the year as well, that's at Heritage Bank Stadium. And then a home game against Geelong thrown in there as well. So they're all, you know, they're all 50-50s potentially, depending on how anyone's going.
If you've got a mate that loves the Lions, tell them to get the podcast into their ear holes.
Hey, of the players, you know, that have been regular 22 for the start of the year, who stood out to you that's impressed you or perhaps even surprised you with their form for the first half? In a good way. We'll get to the...
Well, I got to say, most improved for me is Payne in the landslide. And I think, if anything, the Adelaide game was indicative of how kind of important he's come to that defensive unit. So he's my, like, you know, remember when you were kids and you sort of have, like, the guy that's the best player, the guy that everyone likes the most, and then the most improved, who's like some schmuck who couldn't handball the ball, and then, but yeah, Jack Payne has been my most improved by a mile.
Yeah, Jack Payne for me too. Darcy Wilmot has impressed me as well with his form. He's had a couple of quiet weeks in there, but generally speaking, I didn't think he would be. You know, if you had asked me at the start of the year, is Darcy Wilmot going to play every game? I probably would have said no. I think there was a number of players sort of vying for that halfback position. Same with Connor McKenna. I didn't have him in my 22 at the start of the year as well, and he's obviously held his spot for the entire time. So those three all in the defensive half. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but just the consistency and reliability that Dunkley has brought each and every week. Like, I don't think he's had a bad game.
No, I don't think so. And I'd also probably throw like Will Ashcroft in there as well. Like, we knew what he was when we got him, but we didn't necessarily know whether that would translate into, you know, AFL seniors. And I think just like, it's like an interesting take on like the modern footballer, I think, just in terms of the professionalism that he goes about it. And it's like, you know, he was carving it up in like the TAC Cup last year, getting like millions of disposals. And just the kind of ability to sort of change your style and go, well, I don't necessarily need to be like a 30 plus disposal winner every game. I can just plug the space and work hard at the craft, you know, learning from, you know, two really, really good, you know, midfielders, particularly inside the contest. So the ability to kind of transition that into sort of a more impact disposal player has been really mature. I'm looking forward to seeing how that progresses, because it's not like that's not going to be the case for his career. It's just sort of the thing where he's in there doing a lot of hard stuff. So when you can kind of look at, you know, sort of the way that like Matt Rowell started with a bit of a bang, and then he sort of went heavily into the contest and was a little bit seen as like one-dimensional. And it's kind of like, I don't think he is. I think he's just been working on that element of the game to then kind of marry the two together. So I think Ashcroft is kind of almost fast-tracking that to be able to then, you know, explode out of the contest, or, you know, act as a link player, be that one of those players that can like sort of individually take the ball from inside to out. So I think that's, you know, that might not happen at the end of this year. It might take a couple of seasons, but far out, he's learning from some good players to be able to do that.
Yeah, he certainly is.
So that's impressed me. And I think just, I got to probably just throw it out there, like the small forward group as a whole and how they've kind of changed their mentality around playing the game. It enables the midfield to then put their pressure on the ball and then make it, so it's, you know, a tiered system to then make it easy for the defense. So that, and then another shout out just being like Danaher and Hipwood after they got
for sure
destroyed, and their ability to kind of bounce back to it. I know Hipwood's been kind of down, and like, you know, Hipwood's not playing kind of a conventional key forward role at the moment. And what he does, I said he doesn't equal stats last week, and it's really true. Just what he does is kind of not quantifiable by how it looks. It's sort of just its effort and its threat, and it's the fact kind of that, like, if you leave him alone, he can, and he generates scoring chances for others. So that's the real positives for me.
Yeah, for sure. Danaher especially. I mean, he got slammed after that Bulldogs game, and since then, you know, the work he's been doing up the ground, playing that second ruck role, he's, you know, now he's being spoken about in certain circles in, you know, all Australian conversations as well. So he was said as the hottest thing in footy. Yeah. So he's really,
which I thought was like, I'm like, man, how can a guy with a haircut like that be that hot? But I think, sorry to cut you off, but like, you know, a lot of the talk in that Bulldogs game was like the 0 goals and 4 behinds, but like no one gave a shit about the 4 behinds. Everyone was worried and annoyed about the effort that was put in.
Yeah.
And I couldn't care less about the number of goals he's kicked. Yeah, it's like 1 game's off of his boot, but it's the effort and the working up the ground and like not looking like a moron that's kind of like been the good part.
And just the way, I mean, both of them, Eric and Dan, have been attacking aerial contests. You know, that was probably the biggest knock after that Bulldogs game, was just not competing and creating a contest, but they've been exceptional in that since. So it's been really good to see that sort of side of his game lift, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised, and I can't remember who it was that said this, maybe it was Lockie Neal after a game, that he might be right up there in terms of leading the BNF count at this point.
Yeah, well, I think there was a moment in that Collingwood game just where you had Hipwood leaving more and just like running through Frampton, and that was kind of a bit of a like, that's sort of that kind of mentality shift, because, you know, more for all intents and purposes like pulled out. And, you know, you had Hipwood going through the back of Frampton to create a scoring chance. And it was like, okay, guys, you understand now. So that all the time.
And I think we said it at the time, you know, that's got to be, you know, the precedent's been set. That's got to be the standard. It can't just be a flash in the pan. And to their credit, it hasn't been. It's been consistent week in, week out. You know, there's been a couple of games where they've been a little bit quieter, but generally speaking, probably couldn't ask too much more from them. All right. That's the good. Let's sort of have a look at who we would like to see lift in the back half of the year. Not necessarily been disappointed in them, but would hope for a stronger second half.
Yeah, there's a few. It's interesting because if you look across the board, it's almost like 50% of the players haven't really played to their potential, if not more. It's been really interesting. Like, yeah, there have been times where they played all right, but I can't seem to sort the team by like, oh, here we go, position. Brilliant. If I'm going through it, I'm like, I don't think Starcevic has been at his best. I don't think Coleman's been at his best. Rich has not been at his best. I don't think McKennan's been as good as he has the first couple of games or the first sort of, chunk of the season. Do you want to go by group or do you want to go by, I could go on. And I'm not saying that I don't think these players have been suitable, but I'm just like, you can get more out of them.
Yeah.
Which is exciting because if you've got people that are kind of not like that aren't quite playing as well as we know that they can. Like Coleman, a lot of people had him as like a bit of a sneaky like All-Australian this year.
Yeah, sure.
And like he hasn't been. He's been good. He's been fine, but he hasn't been like at that weird like intercept mercurial line breaking sort of. We talked about Andrew McLeod a couple of weeks ago. That style of distribution. That's quite a lot of players that have been playing every week. That's like they haven't really been playing as well as they can. What do you reckon?
I'm going to limit to maybe sort of 4.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're right. I mean, I get it.
Getting a bit ahead.
Everyone can sort of, I don't think anyone's playing to 100% every week, but I think that, to expect that's superhuman stuff. Gunston is probably the obvious one that has probably not lived up to the hype, the expectation that perhaps many of us had, and maybe we just need to wrap our heads around the fact that he's getting older and maybe just we're not using him in the way that the Hawthorn structures were sort of used to using him. Obviously, McCluggage and Bailey are 2 names that I've sort of mentioned on and off throughout the year, and I think McCluggage especially has been building over the last sort of, call it 4 or 5 weeks, but I still think he's got a lot more to give. Bailey's been hot and cold, and Cam Rayner, he obviously had that great game against the Pies, but we haven't sort of seen that as often as I guess a lot of people would hope. He's had flashes and bits and pieces, and I thought, in fact, against the Crows, he was a real presence in the forward 50 in the first half, and we were playing him out of the square, and then, the next, we'll see him in the midfield as well, so I thought he was all right without really having a huge impact, but I'd like to see him over the next season or 2 or 3 sort of reach that De Goey, Christian Petrarca type of impact on games more consistently.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on whether you want to kind of facilitate that by having him start at the bounce and roll forward and then have someone roll back. Whether that's the value that you see or whether you want to start him forward. So it's kind of, there is a little structural implication of like having a player like, I mean, who have we got? You got Petrarca that does that De Goey's weird evil twin stringer. Guys like that, the structure's set up for them to do that, where one goes forward and one comes back. So is it the case that for the larger sense, Zorko's the one that drops from the half forward line back into the centres, or, is that where you have Bailey doing it or McCluggage or whatever? So there's structure around whether to expect that or not, and I don't think we've kind of got those structures in place for him to be able to do that just at the moment.
Yeah, you're probably right. But it might be a bit much to ask to change our whole structure just to try and get, maximise the output of one bloke.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's necessarily changing the whole structure. It's just like, is that happening? And if it's not, then you can't expect that kind of like rolling forward impact to happen. So like, I can't tell you because I haven't really looked for it. But I think everyone's sort of saying like, he can break a game. Why doesn't it happen more often? I don't think that's unfair to say because he's got the talent and he's got the body and like he seems to have the tank to go with it now. And also he's willing to put effort in. So I agree with you. And I think it's just a matter of like whether they're wanting to do that. And maybe because he was playing out of halfback at the beginning of the year, they haven't thought about rolling it through like that. But that said, he has started in the centre quite a few times. But as to whether he's just been playing as a centre, then your guess is as good as mine. But Gunston is an interesting one. I think that everyone, or, we'd sort of been saying that we'd see the best of him in the back half of this year. Yeah, we also mentioned that he looks a bit haggard, so maybe the week off has done him some good. Like, I don't think that he would be like kind of hiding something from the coaches or anything like that. If he was struggling or if he was
Yeah.
not feeling like, he'd be the kind of guy to say, "Hey, give me a week off just to recharge my batteries and we'll go." I don't think that it would be the sort of thing where if you're, say, a young player and you're like, "I need a week off," and it's like, "Well, you're not getting back on the team, you unproven whelp." Are we trusting too much there? Maybe. I don't know. Bailey, as you said, hot and cold. It's sort of one of those ones where you got to kind of take the good with the less good, I think.
Yeah.
The defensive run always seems to be, a step too slower than the forward run. I still think he's really damaging going inside forward, and I think he's one of the craftiest kind of like, let's say, kind of like incidental kicks or inventive kicks.
Yeah.
And to have like him and Charlie Cameron like running around where you're like, oh yeah, they're on their left foot, like tied up against the boundary line with like 7 dudes on them. And you're like, well, they could score. That you can't buy that kind of threat.
Yeah, that's true.
McCluggage is building. I think Berry had a horrible game, but he's been pretty good.
Yeah, he had
Pretty solid.
Yeah, he had a really bad game. Just touching back on Gunston, I think if we're going to see the best of Gunston, I think it will be this week coming up against his old club at the MCG, where he's played a bulk of his footy after a week off. Like all the ingredients are there for him to have, I guess, a good game. So if we're going to see the best of him, it might be this week. So he's going to be on, I guess, extra watch for me a little bit just to see how he performs, mostly after the week off and against his old club. Who knows? Maybe that's all just me inventing reasons to want to see the best of him.
Conjecture, eh? We'll see how we go.
Make sure you follow us on socials. Just search for BL Fancast.
We've had a few ins and outs. We've had generally pretty settled 22 this year.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's been a lot, like the nature of having that and the nature of generally having like a pretty healthy list and having an undefeated reserves team or VFL team. It does provide elements of like, there's a lot of chatter of like who you're going to bring in. And when your team hasn't lost, it's hard to change a winning team. Of the twos, like we've spoken to death about like Dev, Rob, and Pryor and JL. Is there anyone more realistic that you would like to sort of see in the team? Kind of, whether it's coming into the team later on in the year or like that you think can contribute. What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, we're going to have to make a change with Zorko missing the week anyway, so someone's going to have to come in for him. And I want that to be Dev, Rob, or probably Ainsworth are the two. Ainsworth came in for Zorko last time, so he's probably head of the queue. I think
on that, I must admit my kind of ignorance last week, where I didn't see anything. I didn't even really notice that he kind of raked the eye. Was it as obvious? Was it like as obvious as it seems? Because I feel like a bit of a numpty.
It was really strange look, and it's a dumb thing to do that when your hand is near a bloke's face, and it was probably more towards the forehead, but it was still close enough to an eye to sort of, I don't know, crook your fingers and make like a clawing shape in your hand is just dumb. I just don't know why you would ever consider doing it.
Yeah, I guess the thing for me is like the look, because within the wider context of what happened, and I talked about the, Pedler holding his arm and that sort of thing, and like the pat on the belly, It didn't seem like anyone had a problem with it. Like it didn't seem like Pedler was remonstrating, like sort of the way that Brayshaw did it to.
Yeah, and they brought that up in
Barry.
the tribunal case as well. They brought up the fact that there was no medical repercussions. Pedler didn't even realise, like he didn't know that it had been done and all that sort of stuff. But it was just dumb, and it was quintessential Zorko as well.
Rule?
It's the sort of stuff that Dane Zorko would do and has done and does do. So, I mean, I'm happy for him to have a week off. I probably would have even accepted a 2 or 3 because it's just, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing that near a bloke's face?
Well, it's interesting because it just, that I've kind of had I have thoughts of the two most senior players of the kind of group being Rich and Zorko. I think that this will probably be their last season, and to see one of them get suspended and one of them have probably the worst game I've seen them play ever, in the same week is kind of like, is that something that needs to be looked at?
And I'm sure those conversations are happening between Fagans and the rest.
Yeah, that was something that was missed. I do apologise for that because I don't know, because as I said, I basically virtually stopped watching, after the final kick of that Crows game for a week. Was that a sort of trial by media-ish thing?
I mean, there was a bit of media chatter. It didn't necessarily dominate the talk, but I think there was, Hodgie came in to bat for Zorko, but then there was other people that were just like, what are you doing? It wasn't, I mean, Robbo slammed him.
Hodgie coming in, it's like the blind blinding the sighted.
Yeah, I don't think, but, by the time it went to tribunal, the jury deliberated for like an hour. So there was obviously some discussion happening around there, but it landed on, the ban's going to be upheld. And like I said, I'm happy for that sort of. I don't want to see that on a footy field. It's just dumb. It's just silly.
I agree. So just to sort of segue back, we were looking at twos players and who can kind of have more impact going forward, because in terms of who is sort of sitting in that group of players that haven't played a lot, so a lot was spoken early this season about Tunstall, which is kind of odd but cool. Obviously, Kyle Lohmann has been showing flashes in the twos. Sharpie's been in for a stretch, and I think that'll probably do him for this season. And then you look at it and go, well, you got Dev Rob, Pryor, and then you're starting to get into so it's interesting because above that, Cockatoo can do a job if need be, but he would be playing his 50th AFL game. So it's not necessarily terrible to have a lot of, that's not a lot of players that have played sub 50 games. And that's not including people that have played none. I think there could be a chance where maybe just Jasper Fletcher comes in for a game.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that quite a lot of players that are sort of flitting on the cusp of the AFL list have played, more than 50 games, which is wild. I didn't realise Noah Answorth has played 55 games.
Well, I think, those names you mentioned, especially the JLs, Answorth, Matheson, Pryor, Dev, they're only an injury or two away from being, I guess, regular members of the 22. I think Kyle Lohmann will probably is the other name that is most likely to get a game, and that wholly depends on what sort of structure you want to take into a particular game against a particular team. If we do want to give Gunston a rest, then Kyle Lohmann could be there. We could give Tom Fullerton the third tall, who's been kicking bags in the VFL as well. So
I think that'd rub a lot of people the wrong way with Fort sort of just chilling out in the VFL too, because I think there's probably a lot more upside to Fort than Fullerton, and just in terms of his kind of game sense and ruck smarts, because we haven't, although we've Fullerton's come in and he came in that that second final against Melbourne and did a fantastic job, but it's not reliable in the same sense that Fort's pretty reliable, if not anything else. The other thing that I would kind of ponder is we've seen Wilmot kind of flip between the wing and half back, and I surprisingly, not surprising, but I view that he's probably played his best football as a half backman.
Yeah.
In that sort of stretch of time when Sharp was playing as a designated winger, would you look not at bringing Sharp back, but at, say, playing Pryor on the wing or Answorth on the wing and dropping Wilmot in as kind of like a, if Rich, say, comes out, because I don't think that his output merits sustainability in the team. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I'd probably put Answorth top of that list. I just think, like a lot of others, and maybe it's just sort of the echo chamber of this is the situation, but I think we've sort of resigned ourselves to the fact that Pryor and Dev are probably going to be leaving at season's end, so we need to play players that we know are going to be there for the long haul and going to give their all, so probably Answorth over Pryor in that respect, but at the same time, you got to play your best team each and every week, and for, in complete contrast to what I've just said, I'd probably pick Dev Rob to replace Zorko as well. So the other thing we need to sort of have a look at with the VFL and players coming in and out and whatnot is that obviously we've had a look at, albeit a very small look at Gardner, but Dara Joyce, Ryan Lester and Darcy Gardner have all played AFL level footy this year now as that third tall. Payne will come back. We sort of discussed that Lester would probably be the one to drop out. But I suppose if you had to choose, or if you had to rank them in order, of preference for that third tall defender, how would you have that order?
I mean, mine goes Gardner, and then I don't know enough about Joyce to know sort of how he actually is, and I think he was probably in the team in a not so good time because I think Harrison and Payne were kind of still learning how they were going to function as a two. So he was kind of, and he played on some times where we were playing some kind of tall forward lines. So I don't know. It's kind of inconsequential because it's sort of, if Gardner came out, so say Gardner was, stepped to it and played up until whenever, and then he got struck down by lightning, I wouldn't care who came in out of the two of them, to be honest. Out of Joyce and Leicester, it doesn't bother me. Which, actually, I've got to say, if you told me that before the start of the season, if I didn't care whether it was Froggy or someone else, I would have been pretty baffled because I've been critical over the years of Little Leicester, and there's less fear involved than there has been over some other years.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been alone in criticising Ryan Lester over the years, but I think that's sort of why we all love him a little bit more now these days because, he's just plugged away, done his job for years, been in the leadership group, earned contracts, and has turned into a decent AFL level footballer.
You got to wonder whether because you look at him and you look at Zorko and you look at Rich as sort of three of the people that have gone through some pretty lean years at the club. The Hawthorn team of 2008. Were they thinking about Trent Crode and who's that larrikin that was always on the footy show that retired? Crawford.
Shane Crawford, yeah.
Were they thinking about that with those guys? They're like, oh god, these guys won't get out of the team.
Yeah, who knows? Hey,
and they ended up being kind of mega kind of cult heroes, I guess, of that group. Or I mean, they always were anyway. And Crawford was a pretty bloody good player, so. Brownlow medalist, I think.
Yes. Well, you don't need to consider Lightning striking down Darcy Gardner because at some point his body will do that for him. You'd have to imagine by the time the season's out. So I think that'll be not necessarily a revolving door, that third tall position, but I think, I don't think Darcy's going to play every game for the rest of the year.
No, and I think we've also just sort of seen Chris Fagan's willingness to kind of actually pick the team based on the situation.
Yeah.
Whether there's been times we've played taller defensive lines to play on taller forward lines or whatever. Kind of neither here nor there. But yeah, it's a hard one because I think Gardner's probably our best option, but so's fossil fuel, I guess, but it's not. You want to try and switch to renewable, but it just takes a bit of time.
I see.
Far out.
It's an interesting analogy to make, but I am following you regardless.
Get in touch anytime. Shoot us an email at blfancast@gmail.com or join the Discord.
Throughout the year, obviously, after each game we give our votes, our 3, 2s and 1s, and it hasn't necessarily been just Lions players. We've thrown out the odd vote to others like Jamari Ugelhagen, got some votes along there as well. Josh Kelly. I
was thinking, is the Bont going to be leading our votes somehow?
No, he's on a total of 4 for those.
Hey, good riddance. He would have been on a total of 6 if you'd had your way.
But I've got our top 5 here. So coming in at 5th, Charlie Cameron on 11 votes between the two of us. Danaher at number 4, he's on 12. Splitting equals second, Ashcroft and Dunkley on 13. And no surprise to see the familiar name of El Neil out ahead by quite a while on 20 votes between the two of us.
Well, I guess it just goes to show that even though it is kind of like a expectation, we still tend to note it. So, probably no surprises there.
No, I thought Dunkley probably would have garnered a few more votes, and that probably just comes down to us not recognising him as often as we probably should, just in the fact that he just goes about his business without really making a fuss. And I mean, aside from that Patrick Cripps game, he just sort of
that was sort of the one where it kind of brought what he did to attention.
Yeah,
the idea to have a sort of, I don't know, retractive game to the other team whilst still impacting going forward. So I think it was interesting because there were times, first few rounds we were talking about the team not playing team first footy, and where were we going to see that, and sort of bad habits slipping into certain players and stuff like that, because we're sitting there going, we've got former Brownlow medalist and like a young buck up and comer Ashcroft and like a big marquee kind of signing in Dunkley, where was the graft going to come from? And it turns out that it's kind of like, the graft has come from Dunkley and others, but like that's been a really, really unique standard to set, and it's been really good for the team.
Yeah, for sure.
The idea that someone can come in as, what do we pay for him? Like quite a high draft pick and a lot of currency.
Yeah.
And I imagine that he's probably quite a high earner. But to see him kind of not go about being like a flashy, let's say like a typical Bulldog style midfielder is really good, really positive, and it probably shows a lot to some of the other guys in the team.
Yeah, I mean, looking at our votes, he didn't register a single vote up until that game against Carlton and has featured fairly heavily since. So, as you said, it was the sort of game that put him on radar for us, obviously, and for many others. But I guess there's other people there that have recognised his work along the way, and there'll be Bulldog supporters that go, yeah, mate, we know. We knew all along. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the back end of the year pans out, especially for that midfield and the mix, and seeing who rolls through there, and what role McCluggage and Berry have in there, and others that have been floating through. I've been seeing Zach Bailey at a few more centre stoppages over the last couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, I don't know how they're gonna work for it, but I think just the idea of rolling quite a few more players through the midfield, and it's sort of guys that you could imagine starting as a midfield group at other clubs, just kind of gives you that luxury. So there's probably 8 people that can do that. We've seen like Link McCarthy roll through the midfield at times as well, which is pretty baffling, but he's one that's probably worth just a little cheeky mention to the ever bruised or never bruised. I don't know which one it is.
Yeah, I mean, for a bloke that could not get on the park at Geelong across however many years he was there, and he's been putting his body through the ringer this season and still shows up every week, it's an absolute marvel.
Maybe it's a sort of case where his body's actually like that 5 years or 4 years younger than what it appears, because he did miss 4 years worth of footy. I've seen that happen in other sports where you sort of have people out with a long amount of injury, and they seem to just be able to go a little bit longer at an older age. So yeah, that's good. Yeah,
that whole forward line has been performing quite well for all year. So, it's all good stuff to build on, and, the back half of the year cannot come quick enough, and there's 12 more weeks to see what we can see. We had an email come throughout the week, which was really nice. It's always good. It's nice when people get involved one way or the other, whether it's social media or Reddit or through the Discord but there's something quite nice about an email that comes through that's not spam from a person that's taken the time to, and
well, I guess I'll have to give you actual physical address out and get someone to wax seal you like a piece of parchment.
I mean, that would obviously be nice as well.
That's probably more up my alleyway anyway. So this email you speak of,
Ziggy got in touch and had some nice stuff to say about the podcast in general. He listens to it during his overnight shifts and looks forward to it every week, which was really nice to hear.
You didn't share it with me, did you?
I did.
I didn't get to have the. Did you?
Yeah.
I didn't get an email from you.
No, I didn't email it to you. I copied the text in our chat, and you want to know what you said? You said, "Goddamn bastards."
No, that was in response to people wanting us to do this bye episode.
Well, Ziggy was one of those. He was very much looking forward to us doing a bye episode, and we had a.
Why could you not press the forward email button so that I had that sort of it's not spam?
Okay.
I can't believe it's not butter moment.
Well, because I don't have your email address is the short answer to that question.
Fair point, I guess.
Anyway.
I'm sorry, Ziggy. You're not a bastard, but you are a little bit. So.
Yeah, if you can't half tell, Pat wasn't exactly over the moon to do a bye episode, but, hands have been forced.
I was detoxing.
He came back and, it was all great to hear from Ziggy that he loves listening to the podcast, and feel free to email through at blfancast@gmail.com if you ever like. I said, thanks, Ziggy. If you've got anything you want us to chat about on the bye episode, then feel free to hit us up. And he did send back quite a short essay, so I'll paraphrase it as best I can here. But the crux of it was, what's your opinion on Vossi as a head coach? Is his issues actually him as a coach? Is it just the environment that he's in? Does he need better support around him? Is it the location bringing about the issues with player retention? He seems to think it as Vossi, as a press conference, has a tendency to blame smaller issues and talk about heart and effort, but not get into specific stats or acknowledge where they went wrong. Fagan, in contrast, will list 2 to 5 stats where we were poor, and is able to analyse games and go from there. So I guess, is Vossi cutting as a head coach, or is it simply just not in his wheelhouse, if we really want to boil it down?
I think he's probably better suited to an assistant coach, which is odd because it's kind of like to see someone that has been such, I guess, a presence within my football watching life.
Yeah.
To just sort of see them as a bit of a shell of what they represented is kind of disheartening. To see him sort of fumble over his words and look uncomfortable and sort of say, like, put it this way, when he was stretched off with like a broken in half leg at bloody Subiaco in 97, 98, I don't know, I think he would have given a better press conference then about effort and understanding, because he would have been like, yeah, my leg's broken in half, but, you know, the bloody team gone out and done all right. And, you know, whereas he seems really fumbly and just sort of, the contrast is what I'll say is, like, between him and Fagan, whether you're bringing up stats or you're not, it's all deflecting from the main issues. And I don't think, you know, whether or not we're looking at the Adelaide game or other games and saying, well, our contested possession was down and this is the reason why. It's like, that's not necessarily the reason why, whether it's Fagan that brings it up or anyone else. They're not the reasons why you lost the game. They're the reasons why you're kind of, whether it's deflecting conversations, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. I definitely don't think that the situation at Brisbane was good for Voss at the time.
No.
It probably looked like it was, in a similar sense that the Carlton job probably looked like it was a good fit at the time, because there was a lot of talent in the list, but the fan base and the expectations is that I think if you'd said, if you're a Carlton fan and the beginning of last year, I reckon they would have said that they themselves could have coached the team to a finals campaign. You know, Joe Blow on the street would have been able to coach it because they had the talent in the list. Does that mean that he's underperforming? He is underperforming, but it's kind of like the list probably isn't as good as people think anyway. So it's circumstantial, but I don't know whether, it doesn't seem like it's Vossi. And I think one thing that Buckley said was that he's not really coaching the way that he was as a player. So it's hard. It kind of just looks like someone's not quite there that used to be there. And it's just sort of more about ideology and identity, which makes it kind of hard to watch. Because I don't like watching Vossi's press conferences because it doesn't seem like him.
Yeah, I'm sure when he was playing and made the decision to stop playing and go into coaching that he thought, well, this game's easy. Look at the way I've gone about it. I'm sure I can get everyone to do it just like that. But the reality is there's only so many Michael Vosses in the world and want to apply themselves in the way that Michael Voss did and only has a certain amount of natural talent. And I'm sure he bloody loves coaching someone like Patrick Cripps, who is, I guess, closest on that list anyway to the way that Vossi used to play the game. But then I'm sure he looks at other players in the list like Matt Kennedy and going like, well, why can't you just do this? Look what I did. Surely you can do that as well. And I guess the reality is that no, not everyone can do that. And there's a reason there's only so many players out there that can perform to the level that Michael Voss did. So he's probably finding it hard in that respect. But
Because as a player with Vossi, like, what did you put down as his, like, what was his best attribute to you?
His competitiveness, leadership, toughness, willingness.
So they're all of the metrics that are kind of, they're largely unquantifiable, because it's like, your hardness in the contest, things like the Scott Burns moment, which we probably, for that one, there would be 20 others.
At least.
I think he's the best leadership. I think he's the best captain that the game has seen, particularly the modern era.
I'd put Selwood and Hodge in probably the same bracket. I mean, obviously, I'm going to have Voss top of that list for.
It's interesting reasons. Because I would, but I'd have them like the kids these days do their tier list. I'd have Voss in the S tier and those two as A tier, because I think the other two kind of came in a time where like the modern footballer was sort of there and able to sort of the expectations were more so set as much by the club and by the industry as much as they kind of were at the time, which was much more, a Lee Matthews thing and a Voss thing and a player group internally. Like the idea of getting the players around Voss and like the lead by example to facilitate, I think surpasses the other two. But they're definitely there for company. But yeah, it seems like he was always willing to just put everything on his back and take it on. Whether it was physical heat, whether it was, taking the game where it needed to go or that sort of thing. Like, second to none. And it just doesn't quite translate as well to football now, I don't think.
No, you're probably right. And like the closest captains anyway floating around sort of willingness to do that in the AFL would probably be, I guess, Bontempelli and Cripps to that, but nowhere near
So
the level.
said Selwood last year, and we saw what that lead by example can do in a final series and in a tilt for premiership. Because a lot of people do. It's weird because Voss, you don't look at the stats and go, he was a great player because of these stats.
Yeah.
He was a great player for what he did. That was a seen thing, whether you're at the ground or whether you're watching, and you can just tell that there's like an aura about it. And that's one of the elements, funnily enough, that I like about the midfield group that we've got now, is that it's less focused on like, the Bulldogs handball club bullshit that's like, well, we're all going to get... Like, Jack McRae, I couldn't tell you anything that guy did. He probably won a premiership, didn't he?
Yeah, he was probably part of that premiership, yeah.
But as far as a player that's like broken disposal records, it's done nothing in the game other than win a premiership. Aaron Shattuck won a premiership. We talked about that. But it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. Like that's so unimportant based on what other things can do with less.
Well, to articulate your point, and this is something I've been sort of thinking about for the last 12 months, maybe 2 years. If you ask the average person on the street, I'll ask you right now, who was better, who is better, who was better, who would you rather have in your team, Nick or Jack Rewalt? Who would you pick? Nick. And I think most people would say Nick. But every single stat goes the way of Jack. Goals, games played, premierships, final series, Coleman's. Like, everything is in favour of Jack. He's had the better career. But it's that intangible... And, I mean, add to it the stat that Nick will never get, apart from the premierships. He's sung live on stage with the Killers. Everyone would...
I mean, that's sort of something that, like, I wouldn't want ever to see the light of day, but,
But
it's me.
Most people would pick Nick because of that stuff you're speaking about, the intangible leadership that you see week in, week out, even though Jack will go down as the better player, career, whatever.
Well, I was interested to see how close Jack and Tom Hawkins were when they had when they were both playing, like old man game, what I'm going to call it. How close their stats were. They went through them all. And it was like, you would be picking Tom Hawkins every day of the week, every season, up until probably first 5 rounds this year. Actually, that said, they're both pretty old. But yeah, I certainly didn't expect them to be that close. Another example I'll give is the 2002 Grand Final, where Buckley won the Norm Smith medal. And the fact that kind of Voss didn't change the way they voted on Norm Smith medals going forward. Because they used to vote like...
Three-quarter time,
The three-quarter time or early in the fourth quarter. Which is, what the hell even is that?
Yeah.
Is that symptomatic of the fact that, like, the premiership quarter, as hallowed by everybody, was purely just because they had decided at three-quarter time? Or was it, like, symptomatic of that? Or was it, what was it? So that in itself, Voss probably ended the game with 23 disposals or whatever. I think Buckley had 30. Buckley was probably the best player on the field. But Voss was the reason why we won that premiership.
I mean, that mark on the wing, that goal from 50, all that stuff.
So it was, it's an example. We've kind of gone off on a weird floaty tangent here, but like, it's unquantifiable things. It happens a lot with a lot of sports that focus heavily on stats. I mean, it's again a reason why I find Nick Dacos a little bit hard to stomach. You're like, you don't need to have 1 million disposals to change the game. What did we see? We saw Lachie Neale have like 53 disposals against Richmond where we got belted one time, and it's like, did that really matter? Or is a 20 possession game, if you're having impact, better for the team, or does it serve the team more? Or I don't know. It's kind of not for me to.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, for Vossi at the moment, he's coaching a team that a lot of people at the start of the year said were top 8 locks, potentially even top 4. They're sitting 14th with 4.5 wins. And their only win in the last sort of like 6+ weeks is West Coast. So, that's the stuff that Vossi's having to deal with at the moment. I'm sure he's feeling it more than bloody anyone at the moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, is it an overestimation of the list? Probably. Is it an underperformance by the list and by the coaching staff? Sure. We said it last week. They're the sort of team that could just like click into gear and win a couple of games, and that could be something that that kind of helps us out. It could do because they're playing for pride at this point in time. But coaching's such a weird thing because there's simultaneously like people want like a new coach or new ideas and things like that, but then when they don't work, it's like we'll get old premiership coaches in and that sort of thing. It's like
I think they just want someone that's going to get the best out of that list. I mean, having a look at the ladder here, St Kilda and Essendon are sitting in 5th and 6th respectively. I rate Carlton's list better than those two lists. But Brad Scott and Ross Lyon are getting the best out of that list. And you have to think that there's someone out there that can get the best out of this very attractive list that Carlton's got. You know, they've got arguably the two best key forwards in the game. Not my opinion, but a lot of people do. I mean, they're the two last Coleman medal winners.
You'll have no argument here as to that they're not.
There will be people out there that will die on that hill, and I get that. They're the last two Coleman medal winners. You know, Jacob Wiedering's an elite key defender. Their midfield of Walsh, Cripps, Kennedy, Hewitt. They've got a number of players that roll through there. Yeah, that's a top 8 list. But St Kilda and Essendon, who haven't got, they've still got big holes in their list. They're outperforming them. Is that due to coaching? Is it luck? Whatever it is. Maybe it's the senior assistants around the head coach. Who knows?
Make sure you follow us on socials. Just search for BL Fancast.
All right, Hawthorn next week, MCG 1:45, Saturday during the day. Sort of traditional football time, I suppose you could call it that. Good to be back at the MCG.
Can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, that's right. You'll be going, of course.
Yeah.
What do you
Love
reckon?
the MCG.
What do you reckon? Hawks have been... I mean, obviously they smacked West Coast, which... Who knows how much to take away from that. But then they backed it up against St Kilda, got the win there. They looked like they were going to get absolutely blown out of the park by Port in that first half, but they stemmed the bleeding a bit, brought the margin back a little bit. It still ended up being a 50-60 point loss. How do you see this game going on Saturday?
Last week I sort of mentioned Hawthorn as like not part of the bottom. Like I sort of said they were like, there was the bottom two and then the good. So they're almost bridging the gap into like the teams that can kind of beat whoever on whenever, if it's the right thing. We're going to have to be on. Like we can't have a weird like Saturday morning hangover of just like turning up and expecting to go through the motions because like the second half, even just looking at the score, like they put on 13 goals or 11 goals or something. So that's, there's a little bit of like, we have to show up and we have to perform, which is good because you want to be able to do that. We got done by them in Launceston last year. Will Jai Newcomb go to Lachie Neale again this year? Will it matter? Have we got other strings to our bow?
And I guess that's the beauty of having Ashcroft and Dunkley and others roll through the midfield is that we're not so reliant on Lachie racking up the big numbers. Mitch Lewis is playing good footy, so Payne or Harris will take him. They've got some dangerous players there. Young midfields is fun to watch. So you're right. We're going to have to show up. Good to get a game at the MCG, as I said, and under the belt because we need as many of those as we can get, especially against.
Do you reckon we just flood the corridor really hard and show a bottom team how top teams play by going on the wings?
Nah, I hope not. I think
sort of say you won't get to bite off these corridor kicks, you young whippersnappers. Go down the line to Harris Andrews every time.
I mean, I'm sure they'll try and force it as much as they possibly can. Yeah, Zorko out. Who you got coming in for Zorks?
Yeah, I guess we almost did like a bit of an ins and outs last week, which I guess was conditional, but not. So we'd have Zorko coming out, Payne's coming back in, Frog probably coming out. I mean, if it was me, I would have Rich coming out as well, and I'd bring me old fetish boy Pryor in.
Sure.
And I drop Wilmot back to a halfback. That's probably not going to happen. So I just imagine it's probably Froggy coming out for Payne and Answorth coming in for Zorko.
I'd say that's probably going to be it as well. Although, I still
stick
got
Lester as the tack sub.
Yeah,
because that gives you a bit of versatility.
Yeah, for sure.
I think there was a time, probably I want to say about 5 years ago, where Lester was like, he had the highest ratio to centre bounce attendances and clearances won by centre bouncers which is hilarious.
Sure.
It was like he'd been in like 3 in the whole season and they'd won all 3. It was like 100% record. It's like, why did he get lost? Why was he there? Like,
I mean, there was a few.
by standing still, maybe it was like that train analogy I made. By standing still and everyone moving around him, he looked really quick.
Very possibly. All right, well, that's all to look forward to. Saturday, 1:45, yeah.
What did you have?
Yeah, I'd probably have Ainsworth. I mean, I do hold slight hope that I think Dev will get rewarded for that monster game he had against Frankston with the 21 tackles and stuff, but I think Ainsworth is probably more likely at this point.
Do you reckon maybe they could put someone, Zorko playing half forward more often, see a cheeky Kyle Lohmann come in?
Maybe.
He's kind of a bit of an, like, it's almost like he's just sort of just out of reach, the old Kyle Lohmann. It's like, what is he going to be as good as he is when he turns up? Like,
well, I mean, we saw he kicked 7 goals in a huge win against Essendon by 118 points or whatever. The following week, he kicked 0 goals too. So, not a blowout. So, maybe he's good when things are going good. Maybe he's just one of those guys that needs an extended run in AFL, but not likely to happen unless an injury.
Because he came in, he played 2 games, then did a syndesmosis, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because he was like, he showed a couple of weird kind of X Factor flashes.
Yeah,
which was cool. And then it was like, oh, that guy, he did one of those things where his foot got crushed and he did like a spiral, and it was like, man, that guy's foot almost came off.
Yeah, it was pretty gross. All right, well, Saturday 1:45 at the MCG. There will be changes. We've sort of given our forecast. Who knows if that will be true or if we'll see a surprise packet. None of us saw Harry Sharp coming in a couple of weeks ago, so Fags has the ability to roll the dice. 12 games left. We've put ourselves in good enough position to make a top 2, a top 4, so let's keep the train rolling, and the quicker I can forget about this game against the Crows, the better.
Fag train.
Woo woo.
But I do want to leave you on one thing. You little beauty!